You're having a fantastic time at the river. You decide to jump in, and just as quick as it takes for you to snap, you shatter your ankle. My first thought, when is the pain going to stop? Hello, my name is Robin Elkins, and today I'm going to be discussing traumatic injuries. Now, the event I just described happened to me over a year ago, and I'd like to share some of the information I've learned from doctors and nurses, personal research, and personal experiences going through a traumatic event. I'm going to define a traumatic injury, some of the symptoms associated with it, and of course some of the steps on to recovery. Now, my traumatic injury was I jumped into a river and I shattered every bone in my ankle, and I had to have multiple surgeries, and it was really very traumatic. I was miles away from any hospital whenever it happened. And now, according to the Center for Disease Control, their definition of a traumatic injury is any injury or wound to a living body caused by the application of external force or violence. Now, I think my injury applies to that very well. Now, despite that rather good definition, researchers can't quite agree on a precise definition for trauma. However, they do agree that trauma responses include both physiological and psychological symptoms. And psychology today describes that during a traumatic event, the body's nervous system gets kicked into high gear, and your survival mode is enacted, and stress hormones like cortisol spike the blood pressure and the blood sugar. This is to try to get you into a fight or flight type of mindset. Now, however, in trauma, this continues and can cause the immune system to slow down, causing recovery to take even longer. Now, some of the symptoms of traumatic injury. Some of the symptoms I experienced were depression. I got very, very depressed, and I didn't know where it was coming from. It really took me by surprise. And since I started getting depressed, I started eating more. And I gained 30 pounds in the 6 months that I was unable to put any weight on my ankle. I was experiencing both emotional and physical symptoms. Helpguide.org, a mental, emotional, and social health guide on the internet, describes emotional and physical symptoms of trauma. Some of the emotional symptoms of trauma include depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, mood swings, feelings of helplessness. Some of the physical symptoms of trauma include panic attacks, chronic pain, unable to cope in certain situations. And also, if you've ever had a trauma previously in your life, the new trauma can sort of awaken the memories of the old trauma and cause them to be associated with the new trauma. Now, I definitely had depression, and I also went through the inability to cope when, after finally getting to the first hospital, the nursing staff confided in my brother that they believe, and I quote, their surgeon was incompetent and they suggested I seek medical attention for my ankle at a different hospital. Of course, this was a lot to sort of take on. It had been hours since I'd really received any pain medicine. It took hours to get to the hospital, and I just sort of fell apart. And I really had no idea how I was going to bounce back and recover from this. Speaking of recovery, PsychGuide.com says that trauma should be addressed immediately, and that the sooner you start to address the trauma, the sooner you can start to sort of help overcome it, and that the longer it takes to address it, the more permanent it's likely the trauma will be. Dr. Susan Babel, a psychologist and a trauma and depression expert, says that you should combine physical therapy and psychotherapy as a logical pain management for chronic pain and trauma, because the two are really closely associated. Chronic pain is pain that lasts for over 12 weeks and continues on, and it can go on for months and even longer unchecked. The International Association for the Study of Pain says that acupuncture is also an effective treatment for chronic pain and other long-term forms of pain. My recovery, as soon as I was able to put weight on my ankle, my surgeon suggested that I begin a daily walking program, and immediately I started to feel better. My depression started to go away. And whenever I did a little bit of research into it, I found that walking is actually the best method for the lymph system to start to reoxygenate the muscles and start to rebuild and rehabilitate them. As far as the depression, I found a study by Dr. James Blumenthal that described how people who are active are more likely to be less depressed than people who are inactive. And more importantly, people who were previously active and stopped being active become even more depressed than as if they had never been active in the first place. And I found that really resonated with me because I had been a very active person beforehand, and then after shattering my ankle, I became very inactive. I spent most of my time on the couch. Because of the depression, I found it really hard to get up in the mornings. Also, I had a really great support system at home. That's something that's really important as well with recovery. My mother is a psychiatric nurse, and my father is a licensed therapist. And those are two resources I'm incredibly grateful that I had. They allowed me to really sort of discuss some of the issues and help me know that it wasn't my fault necessarily, and that I can recover and I can bounce back from this. And I was grateful at first, that my injury wasn't worse. But after researching some of the symptoms and some of the recovery that other people have had to go through with traumatic events, I know that I was really lucky and blessed that my traumatic event wasn't worse, because it very easily could have been. It's also important to note that trauma affects loved ones as well as the victim, and it's important to be patient and understanding of them. It's hard to do this because they tend to shy away and push away, but helping to be understanding really, really helps the victim of a traumatic event. And I've recovered a lot. It's been a year. I'm walking, I'm running again, and I feel great. However, I don't think I'll ever be able to jump again. Well, at least into rivers, that is. Thank you.